all of you, and I'm pre-welcoming people who will continue to join us over the course of our time. I'm Jane Patterson, and I'm the project director for the Communities of Calling initiative at Collegeville Institute. And I'm really, really happy to welcome back Ellie Roscher, who got us started off on embodying anti-racism, and this is our second installment in that series. And so I will invite Ellie then to welcome her friend Kevin.
Hello, folks. I am so happy to be with you today. As Jane said, my name is Ellie, and the hat I'm wearing in this session is the one who thinks about bodies all the time, and embodiment, and how we do anti-racist work at the body level. From working with folks for a long time, I think we have an instinct to jump to the often more sexy work of systematic anti-racism, or think about interpersonal anti-racist work. And if we don't also tend to the work inside of our bodies, I think it can be easy to burn out and to feel under-resourced when we're in communities. So that will be the role that I play today in our session with Kevin. I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Kevin Lally, PhD. I like to do double just to make him blush a little bit. Kevin and I have known each other for a very long time. We went to high school together, and then circled back and taught at the same high school for about 5 years. Kevin has his PhD in cultural literacy, but I just like to explain it as he has his PhD in whiteness. He went into the work as a white teacher, teaching white students and having that race talk in the classroom not go very well, and wanting to think about how we can work with white students on whiteness in a way that doesn't send them into guilt and shame. His research is absolutely fascinating. I always get very, very energized. And I've heard his spiel so many times and I never get sick of it because this race work is slippery, and whiteness has a way of melding and molding and shifting. And so I can't think about it and work on it enough, right? This is deeply, deeply the work of our lives. Kevin invited me to come alongside and do this work with him, because he saw in his PhD work, oh, we can't just think our way out of this problem. We actually have to feel our way through. The healing happens in our bodies. And so that's kind of the play that he and I will be working with you on today. So before I hand over the Zoom microphone to Kevin, I'm gonna just invite us to get into our bodies a little bit. One of the things that I like to start with is just a simple one-word check-in. So I'll invite you just to maybe take a shoulder roll or two, just recognize that even a few minutes on Zoom can be tricky on our bodies. Maybe take a slow head roll. Notice how your body is feeling at this point in the afternoon. And then whenever you're ready, blink your eyes shut or take a soft gaze and drop into your body. Feel your awareness dropping down in and notice how your body is feeling. We're never just one thing, but notice what maybe is taking up a lot of space or rising to the surface for you. Take a really full inhale. Take a really slow exhale. When you reach the bottom of your exhale, blink your eyes back open. And I'm going to invite you to put your one word check-in into the chat, just so we can get a sense of what the energy is like in the Zoom community this afternoon. How are you feeling? What kind of body energy are you bringing into this shared space? Intrigued. Little jittery, curious, excited. Transitioning, yes. Thanks, Jane. Mhm. Full learning. Thank you. Focused, eager, curious, digesting. Thank you. A bit distracted. Yeah. Thanks, Claire. Tired but curious. I love that. I love that. Thoughtful. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful just to get a sense of the room. I'm going to lead us just in a little bit of conscious breathing. For me, our breath is a tool that is always there. We sometimes forget that it's a tool that for me, the breath brings me back to my body. I talked last time about, I really believe that one of our vocations, part of the work of our lives, is to inhabit our bodies. And we live in a very disembodied society. I argue that we're a part of a very disembodied church. And so there's layering invitations to stay in our minds. Kevin is going to share such exciting stuff. We're going to want to be up in our minds. And so the work is to continue to hear our bodies, to turn toward the wisdom of our bodies in this work. And the breath for me is one pathway. Okay, so I'll just lead us in a few conscious breaths. If this is new, it can be very helpful to give your mind something to do. So I'll get us started, and then I'm going to invite us to think in our minds the word I on your inhale, and to think in our minds M on your exhale. It gives us, like I said, our brains something to do. And it's also very interesting in this society. Part of white supremacy is driving this productivity and this efficiency. Our roles and tasks can be very important to us. It can be really soothing to say I am and have that be the complete sentence. And notice the period there as we breathe and do the ebb and the flow of the inhale and the exhale. Okay, so I'll invite you again to move your body with some intuition, kind of like a kid waking up from a nap or a pet waking up from a nap, kind of move however your body wants to move. If you feel more comfortable turning your video off, that's always an option, but we'll have our eyes shut as we breathe as well. So taking movement kind of on our way to stillness, there's no need to rush this at all. When you're ready to move towards stillness, maybe rock your body weight around. If you're sitting, feel your two sitting bones, equally distribute your weight among your two sitting bones and stack your shoulders up over your hips. Cross your legs, uncross your legs if they're crossed. That'll just open up our breathing pathways a bit. And then blink your eyes shut or take a soft gaze. Maybe take one more shoulder roll, placing your shoulder blades on your back, anchoring the bottom of your shoulder blades there, widening through your collarbones. On an inhale, reach the crown of your head up toward the ceiling. On an exhale, gently ground down through your sitting bones and through the soles of your feet. Notice the temperature of the air on your skin. Notice your clothes touching your skin. And then allow your awareness to go underneath the surface. And again, notice how your body is feeling. Notice if there's places you can sense constriction or expansion, fatigue or energy. And then notice that you're breathing. No need to alter your breath at all. Simply turn your awareness toward the inherent expansion of your inhale and the release of your exhale. Invite your breath down into your diaphragm, allowing a supple belly to expand on your inhale. And then we'll meet at the bottom of the exhale. On your next inhale, I. Exhale, M. Inhale, I. Exhale, M. Continue that on your own. I on your inhale. M on your exhale. If your mind wanders, that's totally normal. Bring it back to your mantra, allowing your breath to be louder than your thoughts. When you reach the bottom of your next exhale, you can let go of the mantra. On your inhale, fill your lungs all the way up. Exhale slowly. And when you reach the bottom of your exhale, blink your eyes open and come on back. Okay. Thank you for breathing with me. Kevin, you're up.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Ellie, for the settling. That's always really useful for me. And thank you to all of you for your time and your attention. As I mentioned, I'm going to be sharing some of the researchy work that I've been doing around whiteness and anti-racism. I want to throw out a few initial caveats. One is that I don't want to presume, I don't assume or presume what we all know, what we're familiar with, what might be new. It's certainly possible that a lot of this is very familiar to you, and it's possible that a lot of it is very new. I want to, one of the things that Ellie and I work towards is dispelling this idea that if you know a lot about anti-racism, that you must be so anti-racist. So I want to just name and emphasize that there is no end to our learning about this, and that in the course of our work, this session and next, please use the chat to either pose questions, to name, like, give like thumbs ups of recognition, to echo or comment. And then just the way the technology works, I'm about to enter the PowerPoint tunnel, in which my screen will be occupied entirely by PowerPoint. So Ellie is kind enough to alert me to moments in the chat that would invite some broader discourse. I have a slide deck that I made for us today, and I've got things to kind of share. The goal is not for us to blast through a bunch of information. So if we get 3 slides in and have great conversation, to me, that's a successful use of our time. As you can imagine, there's more to talk about than we have time for in our allotted 2-ish hours. So my hope is to introduce a couple of concepts, name what I and Ellie have found to be helpful conceptual shifts, and try to just indicate some new potential directions for us as we think about how can we be anti-racist, how can we practice anti-racism in the world. Now I'm going to talk over myself getting my slides together, so if I fumble, it's because I can't do 2 things at the same time. The other thing I want to name is that my approach is about and is often directed to white people. I don't assume that all of us are white, but I am. And my research and a lot of my academic work is around how whiteness as an ideological structure operates. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's our particular orientation. So this is a picture of me in my idyllic white boyhood. That's me in the lower left of the frame in my grandmother's arms. As I've worked to get smarter about whiteness, part of my work is to better recognize what whiteness is and has been, which is a little tricky. It's not always obvious, in large part because, as a poet I know said, whiteness is not the shark, it is the water. So my approach again is to hopefully try to illuminate or elevate some of the ways that whiteness has operated and continues to operate, and so that we can better approach our work. So a few central ideas that I consider precepts. Firstly, that we believe in inherent human goodness, and that I would mean by that we are all always becoming good. That we are all in the process of growth and change, and we are all always becoming good. That the work of anti-racism, any social justice work, involves praxis, or reflective practice. It's not just thinking, it's not just doing, it has to be both. That whiteness is the construct under scrutiny. Systems of oppression have traditionally oriented or focused on those who have experienced the oppression. So we have things like women's studies or queer studies, and not that those don't have other functions, but that the orientation of so-called oppression studies is only recently started to focus on those doing the oppressing. So our work to identify and try to deconstruct whiteness is that whiteness is the source of the problem. That white supremacy, as a quote from a teacher, Mr. Reed, white supremacy won't die until white people see it as a white issue they need to solve rather than a black issue they need to empathize with. And as Ellie has introduced, the work must be embodied. As Resmaa Menakem says, a scholar that we use quite a bit, the white supremacy is an embodied state. It's something that lives and breathes in our bodies. It doesn't live in our brains. We cannot think our way out of a feeling problem, as my mother, who is a therapist, has helpfully reminded me. That this is ongoing and that it happens in community, which is why the church can be such a powerful vehicle for addressing this. So when we think about what has not worked, I'm going to quote again Resmaa Menakem. We have tried reason, principles, and ideas, pardon me for the lacking, not having a comma there, using dialogue, forums, discussion, education, and mental training. As he says, we have not failed because we have been lazy or insincere. We have failed because white supremacy lives in our bodies. And I would add, or shift our attention a little bit for my own work. We have failed in part because white supremacy has largely dictated our terms of engagement with it, which is to say, the way we have attempted to understand race has been organized and permitted in large part by whiteness and white supremacy.
Hey, Kat.
Yo.
You're going fast, which is fine. Can we just say that the slides will be shared?
Oh, yes.
So folks don't need to be rigorously taking notes or taking images of the slides. We'll get the slides to you later. Yes? Okay.
Yes. And I'm happy to slow down. Let me take myself off of this for a moment.
I think it just helps for folks to know that they don't, capturing this on their notebook is not the last time they're going to see it. I think that's helpful.
Okay. Okay, here we go again.
I'm so glad you got to screen share twice. I know that's
it's already not working right. Here we go. So to get us back to that, what has been in our way? here are some of the things I'm going to talk about today. I'm not sure that we'll get to everything, and that is just fine. So to talk about white as a racial identity, that white is a race, that's one kind of introductory concept. One I'm going to spend some time on is what we mean by words like racism, anti-racism, and non-racism. Non-racism might be a new term, and I'll talk a little bit about the use of that term. But racism and anti-racism mean a lot of different things to different people. So one of our tasks is going to be to focus on that. Passive empathy is another concept, and we're going to take a little bit of a break between those terms and passive empathy, which is it's quite a thing. And then finally, if we have time, the historical origins of whiteness. I want to just name one more kind of introductory idea, which is that the church as a context is new for me. I'm an educator, and I've done a great deal of whiteness work with other educators in schools. And while I was raised Catholic, I went to Catholic school, and I have a big Irish Catholic family, so that religion as a sort of enterprise, as a social structure, is pretty familiar to me. I'm not as familiar with the specific aspects of whiteness and racism within a church context. And one of the framing concepts I'm kind of operating under, and maybe you are as well, is this, which is a quote. James Baldwin said it, quoting Malcolm X. Martin Luther King said something very similar. The most segregated hour in America is high noon on Sunday, which I think of as one indication, for some people, a kind of problem when it comes to us making sense of what is the role of the church in dealing with white supremacy, and what is the context in which that work might happen. Additionally, and if we think about that quote as naming a broad structural aspects of religion in the United States, or in any number of contexts. There are a couple of phrases that have been kicking around in my head. One is prosperity theology. Another is this idea of unity in Christ, and phrases like praying with our feet. And I owe Ellie a debt for supporting me and coming to know some of these. But my understanding would be, if the church is anything like a classroom context that I've experienced, within congregations, particularly predominantly white congregations, there are likely entrenched ideological divides, in that that would present itself to a church leader like yourselves as a kind of problem, and might actually be like a functional problem in terms of how things work. I don't know. That's my, I guess, an assumption that I would bring into this. If the church is like any other sphere of predominantly white life, that's likely part of what's happening. Part of what I'm going to suggest to us is that to think of these, ourselves as being entrenched across an ideological divide, with some white people saying racism was a long time ago, we shouldn't spend a lot of energy on this, we need to do other kinds of work, and some people saying we have to talk about things like reparations, that to see those groups as more similar than different, I believe is a more useful approach, and that'll be a lot of how I'm orienting my work today. So, white is a racial identity. So, like things like democracy or money, currency, whiteness is a social construct that does work to organize our lives and our ways of seeing the world. The social theorist Charles Mills talked about what he calls a racialized moral psychology, where white people would be, as he put it, morally handicapped when it comes to addressing racism, simply from a conceptual point of view, well beyond any idea of intention or beliefs. Just understanding how this stuff works presents a hurdle to white people because white people in this country are systematically indoctrinated in a way that whiteness is not a thing, and that it takes work to overcome those belief systems. But we can start by acknowledging that whiteness is a social construct that does work. Second, whiteness wounds white people first, which is not to say that it doesn't also horrifically wound BIPOC folks. But the initial wound of whiteness is to white people. And it is then wounded white people that enact violence, structural, physical, ideological, that enact violence on bodies and people of color. So our work is, in a sense, the justice work of racism is to look at the origins of the problem, as opposed to addressing the symptoms. Which addressing the symptoms would include some of the work of anti-racism, like reparations, like other kinds of work. But in order to try to stop the problem, we have to look at the impact that whiteness has had on white people. And then whiteness operates with some very powerful ideologies. And I want to name a couple of them. So first of all, whiteness suggests to us that there is an inevitability about social progress. And it's not a mistake or a coincidence that some of the most quoted lines from Martin Luther King include the colorblind line about we should judge my children not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. White people like myself love that because it suggests that all we have to do is stop judging people. And his line that the moral arc of the universe is long but bends towards justice, because it suggests to us that there's a kind of inevitability. The insidious belief that accompanies that inevitability is that the problem is going away on its own. In Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, he gives us a long history, a detailed and exhaustive, relentless history of racial ideas and racist ideas in our history. And one thing he talks about is a sitting president who said it would be unwise, and I'm paraphrasing, it would be unwise to take on a prejudice that is already going away on its own. Basically, we shouldn't try to tackle racism because it's already going away on its own. And as an exercise, I invite people to think like which sitting US president said that in our history. The spoiler alert is that it was George Washington. George Washington said that in 1791, that he believed that the prejudice of racism, the problem of discrimination was already going away on its own. And they all believed the same thing about slavery, which is to say, that ideology has persisted, and there's a belief that this time is different. There's a belief that it's better today than it used to be, and the truth of that to me is secondary from what it suggests, which is it's going to go away on its own. We just have to wait for all the old white men to die, and then it'll be better. And again, the problem is people have been saying that for 200 years. The next concept, this idea of neutrality. Within education, this can pose a thornier issue than I imagine it might be in a church, although that might just be my own ignorance. My sense that in a church, you have a clear mission, you have a clear collective understanding of what you're about, and I'm sure that's less the case than I imagine it to be. But whiteness suggests neutrality. And ideas like fairness and equality, where we have the same opportunity. And we believe within a white construct, within an American construct, that people now have equal opportunity, which same thing, people have been saying that since the 1800s. And the insidious problem suggested by neutrality is that if we don't recognize structural oppressions, we personalize their effects. If we don't look at the structural origins of something like racism, we look at the inequities with things like black familial wealth, home ownership, incarceration rates, college attendance and graduation rates, all of that becomes personalized and it becomes attributed to either personal deficiencies or cultural deficiencies, rather than structural inequalities. So the myth of neutrality, the myth of equal opportunity it's incredibly powerful in this country, and it's incredibly dangerous for those reasons. And finally, the belief, the myth that racism comes from and is about racial animosity. The belief that the problem of racism lies in people who say and do racist things, which would suggest to us that the way to be anti-racism is just to not do those things. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this kind of structurally has played out. But the belief in racism as racial animosity is, I think, central to the myth of whiteness, along with these other two, really. I guess all three of them are central in my opinion. Okay, so here are some definitions. What do we mean by racism? It used to be, and this has not gone away, that racism means prejudice based on race. And I say roughly the 1950s because when you get before World War II, there wasn't a commonly understood sense of racism in the same way there was kind of institutionally after World War II. But we say prejudice based on race. Don't be racist. That shifted as we came to better understand, in part through critical race theory, that racism can't just be anyone who's prejudiced, that it has to come from also a source of power. And this was the definition I was raised with. This was progressive 30 years ago when I was in high school. God, is that long ago? We'll say 25 years ago. So racism means prejudice plus power, meaning I can experience prejudice from a Black person, but I cannot experience racism from a Black person because their behavior toward me is not supported by institutions. Both of these definitions are sometimes talked about as being evil, as being like the evil of racism. That racism is a contagion, it's a social malady, it's this gross thing that needs to be excised from society, as though it is not baked into society. It needs to be cut out, and we imagine we can do that. So here's the new one, and we're going to spend some time on this one. This is a bit of a doozy. So this is Ibram Kendi again, author of Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist, among other things. Kendi says self-interest causes racial inequalities, which are then explained and justified through racist ideologies. So that the root of racism or racial inequality is not evil, it's not malice, it's not animosity, it's self-interest. And it's self-interest just of the people who happen to be in power. They don't happen to be in power. They violently took power and maintained it. But because it's straight white men in power, their self-interest creates inequalities for people who don't share their identities. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this. This is a little bit of a trickier one, I think, for me at least. It was trickier for me to wrap my head around. So we're going to talk about these three terms, as I mentioned: racists, anti-racists, and non-racists. And then we've got this wonderful quote from Angela Davis: "It is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist." So I'm going to talk for a moment about non-racism. We tend to think of our history as being populated by racists and anti-racists. We've got the slave owners and we've got the people who fought against racism. We don't talk as much about the wide majority of people who were just sort of doing their own thing and maybe thought slavery wasn't great, but also had like jobs and families and were busy. At least they would say so. So non-racism or non-racists, first of all, would be the category just about all of us would fall into. Unless you're actively fighting racism in your day-to-day, or you're actively being racist and trying to, like you're a member of a white supremacy group, we would typically fall into the non-racist category. And as Kendi and I would say, non-racism is the problem rather than racism. Again, hardly anyone is racist. Racial animosity does not cause racial inequalities. Self-interest does. So non-racism, I'm going to spend a moment talking about how non-racism kind of functions. And before I make this list, these were all things that have gone through my head. So I'm not trying to position myself as someone who is immune to this or who doesn't live in this. So a big one for me personally, I don't want to cause tension. I don't want to hurt or upset anybody. I don't want to screw it up. I hear something. Do I intervene? Do I say something? Do I make the problem worse by saying something? I don't want to screw it up. Similarly, I want to know the right thing to do. I want to get it right. And I don't want to do it unless I know I'm going to be right about it. I put that in quotes because there's really no such thing. Yes, we should fight racism, but not maybe like that. We should do it a little bit differently. Maybe the problem we're talking about isn't that bad. You know, Obama was president. Haha, jokes. Just kidding. Of course, it's that bad, but it's possible for us to look at it in different moments and say, well, maybe this isn't as bad of a thing. Or there's a lot of people protesting. There's a lot of people in this march. Does my participation really matter? Along those lines, this one isn't mine. Something else is my fight. This one just isn't it. I have a hard time too. I'm busy. I have kids. Money is tight for me. How can I donate to people, to organizations? And then finally, a common one, especially among more liberal white folks, I will win. I have to do a couple things. I have to learn about this. I have to see this movie and read this book. And once I understand it, then I'll take it on. I've experienced these as a kind of helplessness. A dear friend and colleague had asked me no fewer than a dozen times, ask me, well, what's one thing I could do? What's one thing I can do? And his intention was, I don't have a lot of time. You being me, you've studied this, you tell me what to do. And I'll do it. Then I'll just do that thing. And that's imagining that white supremacy is the shark and not the water. It's imagining the problem of racism is like pinpointable with certain behaviors. And it's unfortunately more complicated than that.
So Kevin, let's circle back to some of the sound bites that you put in of I've heard this in Christian contexts, right? Because I don't think we're all in churches in this group, but Christian contexts that this idea of unity in Christ of well, let's not upset, let's not deepen this polarization. Let's all come together. And it's who is that protecting? That's one of the pushback that we are starting to see on thoughts and prayers. Something horrible happens and we need more than thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers is good, non-racist, right?
Yeah, thank you. I'm also going to just point to all of you for a moment and say it's been very quiet in the chat other than Ellie. I just looked. So please.
I'm dominating.
Well,
dominating that space.
This is a tricky thing. I mean, in part, I'm here to convey things to you. I mean, that's kind of why I was brought in. So for me to do that makes sense. There's also this risk that we all, I guess you all, if I'm going to try to just lean on you a tiny bit, kind of sit back and consume it. Which is an approach that a lot of good folks have taken to problems like racism. Which that's a little pokey of me. So I'll permit me to poke you for a moment in the direction of, please do throw a couple thoughts up on the chat. I'm skeptical that no one has anything to say, I guess. So let me get my thing back up. Just a few more slides, and then we'll take a little break.
Before you project, we got something in the chat, and I will just say, Kevin and I have had conversations about whiteness and Zoom. Yeah. And the structure of Zoom, keeping to the agenda and being fast and efficient. And I think that we are listening and typing are two different things, right? So thank you for taking a meaningful pause. Amy,
Yeah,
do you see that?
that's a great question. So this idea of what's the difference between an inevitable social progress, which is a problem, that ideology is a problem, and the belief that we're all always becoming good, which I think is a helpful attitude. So I think of the difference as being within myself and like out in the world. So social progress, as we think about it as operating in the world, are things like people of color experience less racism, and always becoming good is me. Honestly, I think I share this mostly because of we lose track of this in other people. That other people are also always becoming good, which is to say, folks with whom we disagree are also becoming good. There's a belief that among the liberal white people that I've worked with, a belief / temptation to kind of point at other white people as being the problem of racism in our society. So it's the Trumpers, it's the people who, if you live in the city, it's the people who live in the country. But if you live in the country, it's the people who live in the city. It's the South, it's the past. There's a pretty powerful impulse to locate the problem of racism someplace else, and just wait or believe that those jagweeds need to change. The shift is instead to think, like me, they are always becoming good. And for me, like them, I also have places where I need to grow. My essential conceptual shift for me is to, instead of thinking, so some white people, we would locate the problem within society within bodies of color and people of color, communities of color, high crime rates, low education, whatever they say. That's a problem of those communities. Other white people would locate those problems with other white people. Liberal white people would say, well, those people just need to vote for the right people. They need to change, they need to support the right policies. They need to donate money. Both groups are doing the same thing. Both groups are outsourcing the problem. And it's no better to blame other white people than it is to blame people of color for the problems of society. In fact, it might be worse.
So one of the things happening in Kevin's classroom, we'll talk more about this in our next session, is like if a white-bodied race talk comes up, and if a white-bodied person can find someone else in the room who's being more racist and blame them, then my work is done. I feel soothed because I can point a finger at a different white body and say that's the problem, and then I get to be done. And if that's a move of a good non-racist, is that I'm soothed, my day is over. I don't have to opt back into anti-racist work by taking a look at myself, because I'm constantly looking for someone who's more racist than me so that I can put my feet up. Is that fair?
Yeah, more great questions. I'm so glad we paused here.
Yeah. So we have Deborah's and then Amy's.
So expanding on how racism and whiteness hurts white people first, yes. Probably next time. But to be to be fair to all of us, those each typically take the amount of time that we have almost in total. So we're doing kind of condensed versions, which is fine. My hope here is to try to introduce some concepts. And Ellie and I can share resources with you. My book goes through a lot of this. Other people's books go through a lot of this. But yes, we'll be expanding on that kind of original wound or wounds inflicted upon people who, as Ta-Nehisi Coates says, people who must believe themselves to be white. Amy, to your question about prejudice and power being possible for white folks, is non-racism a position that can only be held by white people? I think my first answer is to dodge the question and say that as a white person who works primarily with white folks, It'd be a little bit out of my, I don't know about place, but maybe place to speak to that. I will say there's a lot of, well, I don't know what the right word is. There are stories, there's research about internalized white supremacy, internalized racism among and within communities of color. That is certainly a big thing, sadly. And I think in that sense, we can look at people's behaviors as kind of aligning with some of those toxic and inherited things. Post-colonialism as a school of thought deals a lot with that. So anyway, but that's a little bit aside from me. Yeah. All right. I'm kind of thinking about how to take the next couple of minutes. All right. I am going to finish out. I just have maybe 1.5 more minutes, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ellie for a moment.
And
All right.
I'll just say real quick, like that's one of the reasons we think My Grandmother's Hands is a really helpful resource, is because this work is just going to look very, very different in white bodies versus BIPOC bodies, and everybody is invited to do the work. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so reviewing some of these definitions, how have we interpreted and made sense of what anti-racism is? As in, what are we supposed to do about the problem of racism? Each of these worldviews through history has had its own sense of what to do about it. And again, these have not gone away. They mostly continue to coexist with each other. And a lot of times when I'm having an argument with somebody, if we haven't decided what we mean by racism, our argument can just be like, I think you're racist. How dare you say I'm racist? I don't have bad feelings towards people of color. And say, well, we're not talking about the same thing. We're talking about different things. So in the sort of initial definition, prejudice based on race, don't be racist is the thing you're supposed to do. But also don't see, talk, or think about race. Be colorblind. I've had students recently say, I don't see color as a kind of badge of honor. That's what some people think we're supposed to do. They don't think it's like a deviant view. They think that's what I'm supposed to say. Shifting into the 80s, again, with critical race theory and white privilege pedagogy, which is a lot of what I focus on in my book, recognize how white privilege functions for white people, and then do something about it. Although there has never been a lot of clarity as to what that should be, but do something. And still this kind of attitude, don't be racist. So this newer definition presents us with a whole new range of opportunity. It opens up because it opens up the definition of racism dramatically, it also broadens what it means to be anti-racist. And we all within this, again, in my work, white people especially, have opportunities for this on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. So first of all, to recognize that racism functions in very daily, ordinary ways. When we don't have time to get into these, but these things we keep seeing in the news, the one I'll mention, Stanford economists did a study about the IRS auditing process. Black Americans 3 to 5 times more likely to be audited than white Americans. And that was published on January 31st in the New York Times. That's because they had to automate their auditing process because they had budget cuts. So it turns out when you automate your budget process or your auditing process, you run into structural problems. And at its roots, racism is self-interest with socially acceptable consequences, which is also something we'll talk about. These are, well, all right. So just to forge ahead, this next concept here, and then I'll be done. Anti-racism is a practice rather than a state of being. So again, to review our history, don't be racist. That's non-racism, right? In the next phase, don't be racist, and then just have a disposition of anti-racism as a way of being rather than a thing that we do. And then today, Ibram Kendi, our guide in many, many things, says our work is to support anti-racist policy. And that's anti-racist work. So I put some stages here These are in parentheses because I think of them as pre-work, as anti-racist pre-work, which is kind of a lot of the training that Ellie and I have done. So we learn about it, we develop a personal capacity through our embodiment work. We start to share that and help others understand it. We provide material and ideological support, and we support policies. And then finally, the R word in this context, reparations, which is something we'll spend a little bit more time on, depending on time. We never have enough time. So I'm going to pause and kick it over to Ellie.
Okay, folks, let's move our bodies. You can do this seated or standing. We did this last time. Shake your shoulders out a little bit. Whoa, so I'm buzzing, right? My brain hurts a little bit, and that's exciting. I'm going to invite that energy down into your body. On an inhale, reverse swan dive, fingertips up to the ceiling. And then on your exhale, bring your hands to your heart. Okay, we're going to do that again. Inhale, reverse swan dive. Reach your fingertips out on its way up. Exhale, bring your hands to your heart. One more time. Inhale, reverse swan dive. Exhale, bring your hands to your heart. Feel your body, feel your breath. Okay, shake that out, shake that out, shake that out. Okay, big inhale through your nose. Big exhale through your mouth. Big inhale through your nose. Big exhale through your mouth. One more. Inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Let it go. Beautiful. Before we go back to Kevin, I'm just going to invite you to think or write a little bit about belonging. The feeling of belonging is a body feel. It's a body feel of safety. Our bodies are constantly navigating our habitat. And this has to do with whiteness. If I have a white body and I'm in a white habitat, I'm going to send a message out that my body matters, and it's going to loop back, and my habitat is going to say, yes, your body matters. And there's a sense of belonging and body ease that comes into that loop being closed. It's exhausting to not belong. It's exhausting to not feel like your body is safe. That's the whiteness in the water, where part of the work is to look at the habitat, to acknowledge the closed loop and the body ease that comes with that, and to work on shifting our habitats so that more bodies get that loop closed, that sense of belonging, that ease, where we're not in fight or flight mode trying to survive and stay safe, but we can breathe in our diaphragms and be able to dream and vision and collaborate. This has to do with whiteness. So I want us to think about who you are with, where you are located, and what you are doing when you feel like you belong. You can think about that. You could write that down. Who are you with? Where are you? What are you doing when your body feels safe, when you feel like you belong, when you can drop in to ease? Okay, so I have a white body. A lot of my habitat is set up in a state of whiteness where I have some body ease of belonging. On Saturday, I'm headed to Kenya. I've been there twice before. And that gets disrupted as a white-bodied person in Kenya, where there's not the same ease, there's not the same sense of belonging, and it's exhausting. So I'm going to invite this group over the next month until we meet again to notice who you're with, what you're doing, and where are you when you have that body ease of belonging. And then when aren't you, right? So think about being with your friends versus being in a job interview. When I'm in a job interview and there's a gatekeeper that I want something and that person has the power to give me access to it or not, I am at attention. I know exactly how I'm dressed, how I'm moving, how I'm talking. That vigilance is exhausting, right? So to notice how often you belong in your spaces and to think about your habitat and that closed loop, that's part of the work that we're up to. Okay. Kevin.
Thank you. Okay, let me check in with folks. We have 15 minutes, I believe. Okay. So we can do, well, it's in a way it's your time. So there's a concept I would like to introduce, or I think is a cool concept about empathy. And we can do that. That would take about 15 minutes. We wouldn't have a great deal of time for interactions, or we could interrupt that and have interactions, of course. So should I forge ahead with that? Or are there more thoughts kind of percolating right now? Because we could also just come off of mute and have a conversation.
How about
I'm
both?
breaking
How
up
about
here,
you
my rule.
start?
Yeah.
Is there a way to do this without slides?
Sure.
I think that might invite, there's something
Yep.
about slides and consuming. I don't know.
No,
Okay.
for sure. Okay. Yeah. So I'll share some ideas. And as Ellie mentioned earlier, you will have access to the slides. So empathy. The reason well, first of all, I discovered the concept in an article by Canadian philosopher Megan Bowler, who was writing about being a college professor. She was having her students read Maus, the Art Spiegelman book about the Holocaust. And one of her undergraduates said, I've really found this book useful. I feel like I finally understand the Holocaust. And that was a huge red flag for Bowler, because she's thinking, like, understand the Holocaust? Like, so she wrote about what she calls the risks of empathy. And she wrote about it in a classroom context, thinking about kind of naming, I guess, that our encounter with others, oftentimes that other is for our sort of more liberal education mindset, is a person who's experienced marginalization. Our encounter with that person is often an empathetic encounter, which is to say we read Native Son, which is a book I taught for a long time. We read To Kill a Mockingbird. We watch movies like The Help, or The Blind Side, Hidden Figures, and we have these encounter moments where through a medium, a book or a movie, we have we watch somebody or we read somebody's story and we feel for them, and that's like the intended experience. We're a consumer of that story. We read the story. We feel on behalf of the characters. We think, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. And as Megan Bowler says, there's a kind of unstated assumption that that experience changes people, that encounter with that other is transformative for the reader in a way that would make them more likely to act altruistically or something in their lives. So Megan Bowler is suspicious of that, as am I. So a shifted perspective that she offers, and that I'm going to talk about it in terms of service. So when I did my research with my high school students, once shared about his experience of service learning, as it was called, where these kids from Cretan-Derham, a private Catholic, fairly wealthy school, would go out into neighborhoods and spend time with people whose lives were very different. Often those folks were homeless. And the goal was just to have conversations. They'd play chess. Which in a way is this a kind of cross-cultural encounter. So I'm going to read his quote. So I call him Ben in the study. He says, I was talking with some people about that, how we can have this, we're spending thousands of dollars to have this sort of positive experience to sort of benefit off these people's pain, or not, I shouldn't even say pain, these people's disadvantaged lifestyle. On one hand, I want to go out, experience the world, and learn about these people, gather insight like I did when I read The Bluest Eye, which is the novel by Toni Morrison. But on the other hand, doing so kind of, I don't know, it doesn't make it any better. No, the act of gathering insight doesn't make it better. It actually makes it kind of worse. It's kind of dancing on the ashes a little bit. So what Ben is observing is this encounter that was facilitated for him with the kind of stated goal of him learning from, growing from his encounter with somebody who's different. And as he notices from someone else's suffering or disadvantaged lifestyle, as he puts it, that's meant to be an educative experience for him. So one thing, as I take away from that, there are some kind of central ideas. One is that the presumption going into one of these encounters, so if it's a book, if it's a movie, if it's a speaker who's coming in, if it's a service trip going to a different part of the country, a different part of the city, or a different country, the assumption is that we, being the people who are undertaking this, are choosing to enter a relationship with the people we're going to encounter, which is another way of saying that there's no acknowledgement of my participation in a structure, in a system that has advantaged me over somebody else. So I'm pretending that I'm meeting this person, that I'm entering a relationship for the first time, that we're kind of unattached to each other before that, and that we're meeting each other while our circumstances might be different. We're sort of meeting each other. Well, we're both people. We're trying to find commonality, which is all fine. But there's a lack of awareness of the original problem that would have disadvantaged that person in the first place. And we're missing the relationship, the structural relationship, whereby the ways in which I have been advantaged to be in a position to go visit have affected this person in different ways, in negative ways. One way I think about it, in the summer after George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, I live in Minneapolis, a number of parks across Minneapolis had homeless enclosures, homeless encampments for weeks. And it was kind of this liminal state where the city was not doing anything specifically about the enclosures, about the encampments, and neighborhoods, typically whiter, wealthier neighborhoods, welcomed or worked to welcome the people who were staying there. So in my neighborhood, there was a group of people who set up laundry service, they set up food delivery, they set up ice delivery, they dropped off donations, people volunteered to like keep watch, all in the name of supporting this community. And the belief was, at least I'm sort of making an extension here, the assumption was people could choose to engage with that community, or they could choose to not engage with that community and thereby remain distant from it. And my sense was I have no relationship with the people in that community. And I thought, as I was teaching students and talking about this, how would that interaction be different if my brother was one of the people who lived in that encampment? How would my understanding of how that encampment functions, why it's there in the first place, that would come to the fore for me in ways that I might not think about if I'm just thinking of myself as a helper. I can enter this relationship neutrally, I can provide help, and then I can leave and kind of go back to my life where I'm disconnected from that problem. And of course, what's missing there is that structural relationship that always already exists. The problem in that initial relationship is that it's voyeuristic, it's consumptive. It's for the benefit of the person who believes they're choosing to engage with it. And that there are two significant losses. One is that the person who's struggling is ultimately not, their situation is very rarely changed by that. But the other problem is that the person who is engaging with it, who's coming from a place of privilege, isn't growing either. They're not changing either. Without understanding how I am implicated in the problem of homelessness in Minneapolis, I also don't know how I am empowered to change the situation. I often want to avoid my implication in all kinds of things because it feels more comfortable. I have a lot of things to worry about. If I cannot be implicated in homelessness, I'm gonna even unconsciously opt for that. But if I avoid that implication, I also don't understand the structures that I participate in that contribute to it. And therefore, how can I possibly change it? A new way of having that interaction, a way of shifting our concept of empathy, is to think, instead of I'm entering a relationship with you, we examine the structure that has created that excellent relationship in the first place. And we recognize, how am I implicit? How am I implied in the structures that are oppressing other people? Because I am. I always am. We all are. And when I can recognize and study, if I'm working with students, if I can study those systems and then have an encounter, or not, depending on what our goals are, then I'm empowered to make change in a way that I wasn't before. I'm no longer dropping off clean laundry. I'm thinking about housing policy. I'm thinking about housing policy that I would maybe support as a homeowner. I don't want my property value to go down. I would rather my neighborhood stay single family. I'm just looking out for me. Self-interest, right? Self-interest that causes racial inequities with justifiable or acceptable social consequences. Opposing single family or opposing multifamily housing is self-interest with acceptable social consequences. You're not called a racist for doing that, at least by most people. And opposing those kinds of policies hurt people who are struggling with housing. When we can recognize the way that we are implicated in the structures we are trying to fix, we are also empowered to fix them. Okay. Whew. How does that land? Even if it's like, I get it, but I don't know if I like, landing can mean a lot of different things, I guess.
I put, church mission trip in
Yeah.
that as an example of like charity versus justice, to go somewhere and do something and then come home and no transformation happens. It's because we're not looking at the structural context, the historical, political context.
I think,
Yeah.
sorry, I feel that mix of both, like the uncomfortability of it, I think as a Christian, of that like mentality of service, and that's very strong in our Christian faith, and that even sense of looking outwards and presence is a very big deal. So this like tension, so it brings attention, which is good, great, love tension. But then it also, the implicated structures feels very thinky to me too. Like it denies a presence. So I'm wrestling with that sense of like relationships start with a presence, even before I know all my implications, the structural implications. So there's like a, I don't know, a tension in that relationship of like, presence is really important to me. And also I need to think about that implication. So it's the way, and this is an assumption, like I was hearing, the way I take what you said was, we can't do this until we understand our implications. I don't think you're actually saying that, but like, that's how I took that, whether that was good or bad. And so that brings this tension in me between like this value of presence and knowing. So which means just show up and be there versus, do I know how I'm implicated in this ahead of time, or those type of things. I'm just saying, I'm just blurting how I feel. And
Oh, totally. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think, first of all, I was saying that. I might walk it back a little bit. Part of where it gets a little bit tricky is what it can come down to is the attitude with which I am engaging in those encounters. If I go in as a person who thinks I'm going to help, that I'm in a position to help, so I'm going to help, that without a lot of reflection, versus I'm going to go in kind of understanding how I have the thing. All right, so this is a tangential answer. There's I was just looking at this, so I happen to know the Bible verse, so that I'm going to show off for a second. Luke chapter 3, verse 11. Apparently, John the Baptist is asked, like, what should we do? And John says, if you have 2 shirts, give one to the person with no shirt. And some of the so-called church fathers, St. Ambrose, St. Gregory, went farther and said, if you have two shirts, you have stolen one of the shirts, that it doesn't belong to you, and that you have taken it from the person who has no shirt. That's a very different orientation than I'm giving of my excess. And I think there's from my outsider perspective on the church, there's a school of thought, the so-called prosperity gospel, which is I have to get mine, and then I can take care of others. And that having mine is a prerequisite for my giving to others. And that's a very understandable belief structure. I hold that too. I think where we get into the weeds a little bit is recognizing that if I have more than I need, while somebody else has nothing, one perspective on that is that I've taken that from them. I'm not giving it to them, I'm returning it to them. And as I just put in the chat, opportunity hoarding, there are ways that happens with things beyond resources, like tangible resources. I think it's not that we need to know all that stuff before we go in. I would maybe say it is maybe irresponsible to go in without an acknowledgement that that's part of what's happening, even if we don't understand it all the way. And I would suspect that the people we interact with can feel the difference.
I like that word, orienting. It helps.
Yeah, and that's, Amy, that's what I was thinking when Kevin was talking. He was talking about structures, and it's my job to come off mute and be like bodies.
Mm-hmm.
It's not which comes first. It's all at the same time. What is the energy of your body that you're bringing into this encounter? That matters. How are you showing up? Why are you showing up? Resma's work is saying, like, my body can do harm when I walk into a space and I haven't thought about those things, when I'm not in touch, right? And so, yeah, I heard the structure first from Kevin. And like, that's the paradox, that's the tension, is like, there's no order. We're always working at the body, interpersonal, institutional, and structural level every day for the rest of our lives. Okay, and that's quite the note to end on. Folks, we just ran out of time. Will you please come back next month? Oh my gosh, Kevin, what if we've scared them away? I would love to do a one-word checkout if you have 30 seconds just to drop into your body. What kind of energy will you bring into the rest of your afternoon? Can you drop that into the chat so we have a sense of how your body is feeling? Thoughtful, fullness, full. Yeah, with an exclamation point. Waking, somber. A bit of frustration and apprehension. Yeah. Curious, full, engaged, and listening. Walking. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the quality of presence that you brought into this community. I deeply appreciate you, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you, Ellie. Thanks, Kevin, so much. Yeah, we'll be back same time next month, March 16th, 2 o'clock for our second session. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.